This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 108 of Here's How for the 20th of August 2020. Constitutional change is on the agenda in Ireland, but what about our neighbouring Ireland? The last Scottish independence referendum went down in flames. Will there be another one? And if so, will it give a different result?
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
In a few minutes we'll have this.
We're a small country of 5 and a bit million people. We need to all work together. We all walk the same streets. We all know who each other are, and we need to build the better Scotland, which is a series of communities we call a nation.
That's coming up shortly. But first, I want to thank all of my donors on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who does that. Patreon is a website that allows people to donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month. And that helps me to devote more time to research and finding interesting guests. If you can do the same as them, there's details on the website and at the end of the show. You should be paying attention to Belarus. Well, that's my opinion anyway. I think it's worth more attention than it's getting. A bit of background: Belarus, then named Belarus, was one of the republics of the USSR, and the hint is in the name, it's much closer culturally and linguistically to Russia than most of the other Soviet republics were. There is a Belarusian language, but its status is much like Irish in Ireland, or maybe more accurately like Welsh in Wales. It's spoken by some people, mostly intellectual and countercultural type people in the cities, and in the villages. In some areas they speak an odd mixture of it and Russian, but the Russian language is by far dominant, particularly in the government and workplaces. Unlike some of the republics, Belarus never had any real existence before Soviet times. Much of its territory is the land seized from Poland by the Soviet Union when Hitler and Stalin made the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They'll hate me for saying this, but apart from the alphabet, Belarusian is almost the same language as Polish, just that in Catholic areas they learnt writing from the church, so they wrote in Latin script, and in Orthodox areas they learnt writing from the church, so they wrote in Cyrillic script. Fast forward to 1990, the Soviet Union fell apart, and Belarus didn't want to leave. They were theoretically the only member of the Soviet Union even after the Russian Federation left. That was because there was no democratic revolution that there was in most of the rest of Eastern Europe. The local communist bosses stayed in charge, just a bit less ideology and a lot more corruption. This suited Putin very well indeed. Russia doesn't really see Belarus as a separate country. You can travel between the two without an international passport, and their economies are highly integrated. Belarus is a very agricultural country with some basic communist-style industries like making fertilizer and tractors. It's about twice the area and population of Ireland, and it's dirt poor, although there has been a flourishing of IT startups in the capital Minsk. Belarus has become more important to Russia as a food source since the imposition of EU sanctions. They've developed their own production of things like Belarusian mozzarella and Parmesan cheese, although the joke in Moscow was that it was really the Belarusian printing industry that boomed, since it was obvious that many of these products, at least initially, were illegally exported from the EU with Belarusian labels stuck over the originals. Alexander Lukashenko has been the unchallenged president since he created the office for himself in 1994. His main opponent was human rights activist Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, and it says a lot about the state of human rights in Belarus that she sent her children into exile during the campaign for their safety. Since the election, she has also fled herself. Lukashenko duly announced that he had won the election with 80% of the vote. Most people expected that would be the end of the matter for another decade or so, but the people of Belarus had other ideas. Tsikhanouskaya summed up the situation in a video on her website.
For the second week in a row, my nation is fighting peacefully for its constitutional right to elect its leaders. The August 9th elections were neither fair nor transparent. The results were falsified. People who went out to defend their vote in the streets of their cities all across Belarus were brutally beaten, imprisoned, and tortured by the regime desperately clinging onto power. Hundreds were injured. At least 2 people lost their lives.
The election fraud was brazen. Photos of stacks of singed ballot papers recovered from a furnace have circulated online. But the protests have been even more brazen, particularly for a country with such a terrible human rights record. Thousands were arrested and beaten, with some tales of truly awful torture emerging. But the protests continued every day and are fast turning into a general strike. Lukashenko tried to take control of the situation, giving a speech to what he thought would be ultra-loyal factory workers. It didn't go so well for him.
Я, как и вы, не совсем разобрался, в чем там проблема.
What they're chanting there is "Ukhodi," smoothly translates as "get out." Lukashenko then abruptly ends the speech with a curt "thank you."
Спасибо.
Since then, the strikes have spread. This is the reception that workers from the Minsk metro got from crowds outside when they walked off the job. They're chanting MTZ, that's the name of the transport company. In addition, the staff of the state TV company walked off the job in protest at government censorship. I'm seeing reports that local authorities in the city of Grodno, near the border with Poland, have declared loyalty to the protest movement, releasing all prisoners and guaranteeing the right of peaceful protest in the city. Anyone who remembers the pictures of people dancing on top of the Berlin Wall in 1989 would be forgiven for thinking that Belarus is going to get its freedom, albeit belatedly. Let me tell you, this does not end well. The Orange Revolution, which kicked out a similarly corrupt government in Ukraine 15 years ago, caused alarm and panic in Moscow. Putin is determined to leave the Kremlin horizontally, like most of his predecessors. Indeed, he's caught in the dictator trap. If he were to hand over power at any age, the risk that he and his cronies would eventually be held responsible for their crimes is just too great. He cannot allow himself to retire, much less be booted out of power. And he knows that if one ex-Soviet dictator can be overthrown, then they all can. So he will do anything to prevent that. He invaded Ukraine and seized Crimea in response to the Orange Revolution. The thought of a democratic government even closer to Moscow, both physically and culturally, will not be tolerated. The BBC is reporting the Russians have been sent to staff the state TV stations abandoned by journalists supporting the demonstrations. Also unverified, I'm seeing reports that Moscow is starting an online information battle against the demonstrators and has sent senior FSB agents and possibly riot police to Belarus. Various social media accounts are sharing shaky footage of Russian military of one sort or another in convoys of troop carriers heading from St. Petersburg and Moscow towards Minsk, with number plates removed and markings painted over. But beware of information warfare here. This could be real, but it could equally be Russians planting these images to try to intimidate the protesters. So what's going to happen? Well, I can tell you for sure what's not going to happen. there won't be a peaceful transfer of power to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya or any other democratically elected government. Incidentally, she has an Irish connection. She was the beneficiary of the Children of Chernobyl charity and spent her summers in Roscrea in Tipperary. Anyway, she won't be taking power peacefully, and she won't be taking power any other way either. Putin is perfectly willing to go to war to prevent that, although it probably won't be a war like in Ukraine. In Belarus, the army won't resist a Russian takeover, and regular troops aren't configured to confront civilian demonstrators. More likely, Putin will send functionally infinite numbers of riot troops. Lukashenko had the capacity to arrest and torture thousands of protesters, but that doesn't cut it with such large demonstrations. He didn't have the capacity to arrest tens of thousands. Putin does. And he will. It's an open question as to whether Putin will allow Lukashenko to stay in power. Lukashenko may be more useful to Putin out than in. He could be deposed as a way of deflecting attention and be replaced with a more obedient yes man. But I'm sorry to say, two things are certain. The next leader of Belarus will not be someone with Irish connections, and life in Europe's most autocratic country, for all the hope and optimism of the demonstrations, is about to get even more autocratic. Next up, a slightly more polite revolution.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On the line, I have someone whose ambition in life is to make himself unemployed. It's not because he wants to spend afternoons in his pyjamas drinking special brew and watching Countdown. Alyn Smith is the member of the Westminster Parliament for the Scottish constituency of Stirling. And like most Scottish MPs, Alyn, you're a member of the Scottish National Party, the SNP, which is campaigning to make Scotland an independent country. Why?
Hello there. Well, actually, don't rule out the pyjamas and the special brew thing. I don't feel entirely hostile to that. But no, I mean, the SNP exists in order to promote an independent, better Scotland. And like many people in the SNP, I wasn't always in favour of independence. I used to vote Labour myself. I volunteered for the Labour Party when I was at law school down in Nottingham rather than in Scotland. But through a process of thinking about politics, thinking about where Scotland best fits in the world, thinking about who best makes decisions for Scotland, and also since 1999, when our Parliament was re-established, that created a layer of government within Scotland that was much more accountable, much more intimate with the voters. I mean, we're like you guys, a smaller Northern European country where people tend to know who each other are, and Scotland has got vast resources that are not being properly put to the interests of the people of Scotland. We've got a great country, we've got a great quality of life, but we also have ingrained poverty for too many of our people, and we need to fix that. And we've also had latterly, forgive me just to close the point, that we've also had latterly that where my party's position has always been we'd do better making our own decisions. I would suggest that recently we've just been proven right, that in the 2016 EU referendum on Brexit, Scotland voted very clearly by a significant majority to remain within the EU. But because of events elsewhere, we have been taken out of the EU, and we're still dealing with the consequences of that in terms of losing Erasmus, losing all the benefits of EU membership, and several others. So in terms of what we can do better as an independent state, well, it's an energising debate within Scotland right now, and the people of Scotland, many of whom didn't support independence in 2014, which was our last independence referendum, are now looking at the UK and looking at the EU and frankly looking at you guys, and Ireland is proving what independence in Europe looks like for us. And I think we can do better than we've got.
Yeah, so that's quite a common theme for SNP people to say they want to be like Scotland. But for at least the first 60 years of independence, Ireland was a basket case. Isn't that possible in Scotland?
Well, there's always a risk of all sorts of things happening in the future, but our proposition is that we will be a mainstream European country with the solidarity and support of the EU. So that means that economic stuff is, unlike Ireland in the first days of independence, economic stuff will not be tied to the UK. Quite the reverse. It will be part of the European mainstream. So there's always a risk in making our own decisions, but that's the point. We need to make our own decisions. And the UK right now is doing really badly for us economically. Now, obviously, there's the COVID emergency, which we're all working on together. We've put the badges to one side for that. But where the UK is going is a bad place from our perspective. I don't think a trade deal with Donald Trump is something that we can be building a future for Scottish agriculture upon. I want to see Scotland at the mainstream of the European continent. And I think that's a proposition that's winning more and more people over.
And you say you want to make your own decisions. What do you say to people who said you made your decision in 2014, independence was rejected by 10 clear percentage points?
It was, and there was a demographic thing there. There was a number of people who weren't hostile to independence but voted no to it. That was done in a series of promises. There was a series of promises that we'll have much more powers for the Scottish Parliament. That wasn't delivered. We're a partnership of equals, and Scotland is a partner in the UK, where within days it was clear we were a part of the UK and we should know our place. A number of people also voted to maintain their European status. And this was front and centre of the debate on independence. Our proposition was independence in the EU. A number of people on the opposing side were saying, well, you'd be out the EU, you wouldn't get in, you'd be at the back of the queue behind Turkey and all that nonsense. So a lot of people voted no to stick with the UK in order to preserve their European status. Remember, of course, EU nationals in Scotland had a vote within our independence referendum because our definition of Scottish is, do you live in Scotland? So a lot of EU nationals voted, not surprisingly, to stick with the UK to preserve the status quo that preserved their EU status. How disappointed are all of those guys barely 18 months later when the UK takes us out of the EU against our will? So there's a number of promises there that weren't fulfilled.
Well, one of your fellow countrymen who I'm pretty sure would have voted against independence if he had a vote, but I don't think he did have a vote, Liam Fox, the former Conservative Party Secretary of State for International Trade, when he's not busy clicking on porn links sent him by the Russian military intelligence, he's a big anti-Scottish independence person. And he said during that referendum in 2014 that independence supporters were Republicans in disguise. Was he right?
No, he absolutely wasn't. And this was where our opponents really, in large part, did our job for us by having silly arguments that are absolutely against what we're saying.
So can I put you down as a convinced monarchist?
Our position on the monarchy is there for all to see. It's the Union of the Crowns was 1603. The Union of the Parliaments was 1707. We're talking about dissolving the Treaty of Union between the parliaments. The Queen remains the Queen, as she's the Queen of New Zealand, Canada, Australia. They're all independent countries, but they share the monarchy. That's our proposition.
And you don't have any ambition to change that either personally, or you don't know anyone in the SNP who would?
We've got a range of opinions, and I don't have a strong view on it myself. There's monarchies I like, there's republics I like. And my point is that the people of Scotland need to make those choices. And I think there's a number of, look, Norway's a monarchy, you guys are a republic, Iceland's a republic, the Netherlands is a monarchy. It's up to the people in different places to decide what they want their government to look like. What I want is to put the people of Scotland in charge of that discussion, but the monarchy is not a top-level issue for me at all.
Oh, okay. And I mentioned Russian military intelligence. It's pretty clear from the Intelligence and Security Committee report on Russian interference that the Russian state, through various actors, mostly through online stuff, was intervening pretty heavily on the yes side in the 2014 referendum, as well as, I should say, on the leave side in the Brexit referendum. Are you unwittingly serving the interests of a regime that wants to harm the whole of the island of Britain, whether it's as a united country or not?
Well, no, and the Russia report says precisely the opposite. The Russia report mentions Scotland once. It is assuredly not about Scotland. What the Russia report was that there is, at the very highest levels of the British state, Russian involvement. And then the very next week, Boris Johnson appoints one of them to the House of Lords. That there is the UK political system is awash with dirty money with the oligarchs and property deals and shady companies, and we need to clean out the stables. From a Scottish perspective, I've been very, very vocal on the fact that there's bad actors online, particularly online. I don't think they resonate much beyond that, with wedge issues.
Online is pretty influential these days.
Well, it is, which is especially just now. I mean, during the last 5-6 months, we've had almost all of our discourse has been online rather than in person. So that has altered the tone of that. And I think we'd be fools to think that we're not a target for disinformation, which we are, which is where I've been very vocal with our guys that we need to really be careful about who's putting things into our discourse, who's putting things into the domain. And this is an issue for all of us. And I was over in Dublin 18 months or so ago to have a meeting with the European Commission office there and a forum that they were organising about fake news and disinformation and sharing experience there. This is something that we all need to be aware of. There are wasps in the room.
Okay, have a listen to this clip, see if you recognise it.
Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show from Stormont in Belfast, the home of the reconvened Northern Irish Assembly. 100 years ago, the early leaders of
You were an MEP for 10 years under Alex Salmond as SNP leader. How do you feel about the fact that he's now in the pay of a Kremlin-funded TV propaganda channel?
I think it's a shame. Alec is a hero of mine. Alex, why I'm in the SNP. If he hadn't made the changes to the party that he did in the 80s, I don't think I would have joined the party, because I think we'd be in a very different place. Him taking the money from Russia today in order to have this programme, I hear all his defences about there's editorial independence, but it is lending credence to a part of the Russian state propaganda effort, and I think that's really, really regrettable.
The bottom line is, Boris Nemtsov was shot 6 times in front of his girlfriend in the centre of Moscow, while all of the state-controlled CCTV cameras were switched off, supposedly for maintenance. The journalist Anna Politkovskaya, who was exposing human rights abuses in Chechnya by Russia, she was shot and her body dumped in a lift shaft. Alex Salmond's salary is basically coming out of the same pocket that paid for those hitmen, isn't it?
No, I think that's a really pretty inflammatory way to put it. I've
true.
said that it's regrettable that he's got the programme. I was critical of the programme as it was announced, but that's as far as I'd go on that. I think there's a number of things about the Russian state and indeed Belarus just now that we need to be very anxious about and support pro-democracy. Journalists in particular have been a target of the regime in the Kremlin. I think that's a matter of great regret, and I think it's a matter of great regret that Alex is working with them.
Okay, that's a clear answer. Looking forward maybe to Scotland as an independent state, as the polls averaging out over the past few months, the SNP is somewhere near 50% of support in Scotland. You're in a very good position to win the Scottish elections next year. And both the Labour Party and the Conservative parties have been typically in the teens or very low 20s in the opinion polls. And obviously those parties are diametrically opposed. It doesn't seem possible that they could form a coalition together against the SNP. Isn't there a real danger that Scotland could turn into a one-party state?
Oh, well, you're asking me to talk against my own success. I won Stirling at Westminster with 51% of the votes. Now, that's a remarkable result in a constituency that voted 60% no in 2014. And it was partly about Brexit. It was partly about the prevailing climate. I don't want Scotland to, as you say, a one-party state, but we have that success because the people of Scotland are voting for us. And I think there's Scottish politics is fascinating just now because there's 3 axes intersecting for different ways and different people. There's the yes, no to independence. Then there's Leave Remain to EU, and not everybody who supports independence is in favour of EU membership. Not everybody who supports EU membership is in favour of independence. All these things work out in different ways, as well as the traditional left-right axis, which is increasingly not how people are seeing themselves. So we're having success as a government, as a party, because we're chiming with the interests of the people of Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon is working flat out on the COVID response of the Scottish Government, and she's really putting in an incredible shift on that. The rest of us are working in our different fields, chiming with the interests of the people of Scotland. And the Labour and Tories, and let's not forget the Lib Dems, they do not have a satisfactory answer on the biggest issue which is facing Scotland, which ultimately is who should make decisions for us and who should be our natural allies and colleagues. And my party's proposition is very clear. We want an independent Scotland in Europe, working alongside you guys, the Danes, the Dutch, everybody else. The Tories' position is very clear likewise. They want to limit the powers of the Scottish Parliament.
What's the Labour position?
Well, this is the thing. They don't have a proper answer. Their leadership is saying that they're against a second vote on independence. Their leadership is saying that this was settled in 2014, despite, as I say, all the promises that weren't fulfilled. But meanwhile, about 30-40% of their membership, or rather, that's not true, 30-40% of their supporters,
their voter base,
voters, are very keen on independence. So they need to get a better answer. And if their position is that we shouldn't have a vote on this, well, firstly, that's anti-democratic. And their position that the UK is working well for us is a pretty threadbare proposition in itself. So I would welcome the Labour Party coming up with a new position under their current leadership. I don't see that happening. But that means that we're eating their lunch, and a lot of people are coming to the SNP who, like myself, used to be Labour.
Okay,
so
and for people in Ireland, we understand very well in Northern Ireland that the division between unionism and nationalism is a pretty clear case of an ethnic religious conflict. Does the nationalist unionist divide in Scotland, does that map onto sectarian divisions in the same way at all?
No, in its essence. That's not to say that element doesn't exist in our politics, and it's largely about Rangers and Celtic in the West rather than anything else. We have the Orange Order is active and exists within Scotland as well. They're pretty firmly unionist, but we don't have that element.
They would be associated with Rangers Football Club, and would there be a religious association there as well?
It's not front of house. I wouldn't say it doesn't exist, but I know plenty of people who support Rangers who support independence. My brother-in-law being one of them. There's the football element, which is it goes from everything to banter to more serious stuff. But no, I don't recognise much of the situation in Northern Ireland as tracking through to Scotland.
Would you fear at all that if you did win independence that might flare up?
I don't think so, and this is where we need to make sure that we're working on losers' consent now as well. We need to make sure that nobody has anything to fear from an independent Scotland. And remember that the situation in the north of Ireland is that what they're talking about instead of independence would be reunification, which means a different set of rules, a different set of government. Now, what we're talking about is independence. So the people of Scotland, of all our different opinions and backgrounds and whatever else, would be part of making our decisions. So there would be no question of the issues which are thrown up in Northern Ireland sometimes. But we need to always guard against the fact that there are people trying to sow division. Where what we're trying to do is look, we're a small country of 5 and a bit million people. We need to all work together. We all walk the same streets. We all know who each other are, and we need to build the better Scotland, which is a series of communities we call a nation.
And it was very noticeable. It was very noticeable in 2014 that neither side in the referendum made any effort at all, and I suspect they made efforts not to make any reference to Ireland, and certainly didn't involve anybody either on the nationalist or the unionist side in that debate. Was that just basically both sides being smart enough to know that any alliance like that would be toxic?
Well, Partly, I suppose, but fundamentally, this is a discussion for the people of Scotland, and where there's things that we need to learn from other countries, of course, in terms of what to do, what not to do. Ultimately, this is about who makes decisions for Scotland, and I would suggest that should be the people of Scotland. So we're willing to take parallels from other places, of course, and we're keenly aware of our near abroad and the near situations that we have. But no, I don't see that anyone from outside of Scotland should be involved in our debate on one side or another, because this is a matter that we need to work out for ourselves.
When will you get your next referendum?
That remains to be seen. I think we're ready when we get to that point. But meantime, COVID has really changed the game for a lot of things. The emails I'm getting from the people of Stirling are worried about health, they're worried about the economy. We have an economic crisis over here, which is very far from over, and we've got a lot of work to be doing on that. Also, the climate change crisis hasn't gone away either. We have a lot of things to be working on that. We've got the day-to-day issues which we need, and this is where I would love for us to have the solidarity of the European Union in a way that you guys do. But the constitutional debate is running alongside lots of other issues. So the referendum's not happening tomorrow. I want the referendum to happen when we're ready for it, and when the people of Scotland are ready for it as well. So that's a question I don't have a better answer than that to at the moment.
As it goes, when is presuming it's not interrupted by COVID, when are the elections scheduled for next year?
They're May next year.
May next year, and it's a while out, but if you look at the current opinion polls, the SNP would certainly be in pole position to win an outright majority. It would be difficult then for even Boris Johnson to say, no way, Jose, for a referendum, wouldn't it?
I would agree with that, though I'd slightly disagree with the idea that we're on course for a majority. The electoral system in the Scottish Parliament is the same as the Bundestag over in Berlin. Mm-hmm. We have constituency members and then the additional member system as well, which of course is to mitigate against domination on the constituency and the list. So it is designed to avoid an outright majority. So the fact that we can even talk in those terms is remarkable success for us. But it's not very far from a foregone conclusion. But yes, on Boris Johnson saying no forever, that's just democratically unsustainable. If the people of Scotland want a referendum on independence, it will happen. I'm spending a lot of time at Westminster, obviously, as a newly elected MP, but I've been in politics 16 years. Mm-hmm. And talking to the Tory MPs, they already think we've gone. They already think we're somewhere else. They already think we're a different thing. And there's a big element of the Conservative support is actually enthusiastic about Scottish independence, because they think we're subsidy junkies, and they want their Brexit, they want their England, and that sort of stuff. Now, I want to see us move from our closest neighbours with a great relationship, rejoining the EU, and hopefully, bringing some sense to where the UK is right now, in that we've seen a lot of double dealing over the Brexit stuff, not least over things like the Northern Ireland backstop, which was presented as one thing, then it emerged to be completely different. Mm-hmm. The withdrawal agreement, likewise, there's leading members of the Tory party urging their government to walk away from a solemn legal commitment. We need to get some sense and measured discussion into that. But from a Scottish perspective, it's when the people of Scotland want an independence referendum and want to be independent, it would be a very silly UK government that would stand in our way.
One incident that I saw in the aftermath of the Brexit referendum that I thought was just gobsmacking was that the Taoiseach then, Enda Kenny, said in public that he would represent the interests of Scotland in the EU. That was an extraordinary thing to say. You can't really imagine Emmanuel Macron saying that he would represent the interests of Bavaria in the EU. But doesn't it show just what a state the UK is in, that didn't cause a diplomatic incident?
Well, I'm not sure it didn't cause a diplomatic incident, to be fair. But yes, it was remarkable. And I was over in Brussels at the time, obviously, and spent a lot of time. I knocked my pan in the EU referendum. And it was a star-crossed exercise for so many different reasons. It was the arrogance of David Cameron, who brought it forward thinking he was a shoe-in to win it, the arrogance of the Tories thinking that they could see off Nigel Farage, where because of our experience in the 2014 independence referendum, we were deeply concerned about where the UK was possibly heading, because we'd seen those tactics used against us. We'd seen those tactics used.
Yeah, sure. But my point on that is that the UK, independence or no independence for Scotland, at best the rest of Britain and probably the whole island is in for choppy waters for many years to come.
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. And this also alters our case for independence, in that the single market exists. The single market is a thing that we can point to, in a way that in 2014 our proposition was that the UK and Scotland will remain within the single market. So actually, not a lot of the economic stuff will change. Mm-hmm. This time round, the UK is heading to, well, goodness knows where, in terms of tariffs, in terms of trade deals, in terms of deviating from EU standards. That strengthens our case for independence, in that we will be able to point to, when we're asked what an independent Scotland will look like, we'll be able to point to the EU single market and say, there you go, That's the rules that are working for Denmark, working for Ireland. And the fact that your former Taoiseach made the statement that he made does chime with the attitudes of a lot of other European countries who didn't quite get us in 2014, didn't quite get what we were about. Within Brussels, there's an instinctive nationalism is a bad word. There's an instinctive, well, we're trying to knock down barriers, not put them up. But 2016, the EU referendum underlined that, well, actually, we're the pro-European good guys. We just want to govern ourselves. So there's been a big shift in perception of my party and Scotland within the EU. And I know for a fact that we have a massive reservoir of goodwill when and if the people of Scotland make the choice that I hope we're going to make for independence. That's not to ask anybody to come and solve our problems for us. We need to sort that out ourselves. That's a discussion for the people of Scotland. But the EU is an expansionist organisation that wants members to join. And we won't hopefully have deviated too far from the EU norms by that point. So accession will be something that will be a negotiation, of course, and we can't take any of that for granted. But I think international solidarity made real, which is what the EU is, with all its faults. The EU is an incredible peace-building international solidarity exercise, and I want Scotland to be part of that.
I notice, Alyn, you're not saying the easiest trade negotiations in history, but Alyn Smith, MP for Stirling in the Westminster Parliament for the Scottish National Party. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Great to speak.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Record a contribution to be included in the next show. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
It's worth noting that since I recorded that interview with Alyn, 2 more opinion polls have been published showing the pro-independence side stretching their lead in Scotland. Excluding undecideds, Comres puts it at 54-46, and more recently Panelbase puts independents 10 clear points ahead at 55-45. That's way outside the margin of error, so clearly if there was a referendum tomorrow, Alyn would be set up for an early retirement of day drinking and bad TV. Anyway, go to the website for sources and references from the show, and while you're there you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and follow Alyn Smith at Alyn Smith, that's Alyn with a Y, and get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. And thanks again to all the patrons on Patreon. Their donations allow me to devote more time to research and finding interesting guests. And if you could do the same as them and donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, go to patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website, and there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The next show will be uploaded next Thursday, the 27th of August. I'll be talking to the Irish-American academic Larry Donnelly about trying to understand the Trump voter. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.